I've probably mentioned at some point that one of my favourite aspects of Mother 3 is the characters. There's so much depth to so many of them, even ones that have limited screen time have much intrigue that's worth discussing in depth, so why not do that some more right now? Recently I've been thinking about Klaus. He's certainly one of the characters with the most to talk about from Mother 3, even though he appears in the game for such a collective brief time. In a way, that's where a lot of his captivation the fans of Mother 3 comes from. Lucas is the one you spend a vast majority of the game with. You see his journey begin as a depressed shut-in all the way till the end, where his new fate of the world's saviour is realised. Klaus on the other hand goes a different way. Forced to work under the Pigmask army, the boy doesn't go down the same path as his twin brother. This was always intentional. As early as 1997, Mother 3 was conceptualized to be a story about twins going down a separate path in life, and growing up to have opposite personalities, which was inspired by a trilogy of novels, which happened to be where Itoi got the names for Klaus and Lucas from. The twins were alluded to have differences too in the January 1998 issue of 64 Dream, where it is described that, quote, Lucas is a gentle child who likes flowers and small birds. It seems like they might have opposite complementary personalities. For example, Klaus likes high-tech stuff, which is the opposite of nature. In hindsight, an obvious allusion to Klaus's unfortunate affiliation with the Pigmasks, but nonetheless interesting regardless. Going into these differences is one thing, but what's more interesting is comparing and contrasting with similarities. Lucas and Klaus do have a lot of differences, but their similarities are all intriguing too. A very noteworthy one to me is that both twins desire to get stronger, and both attain that ability, but both through vastly different means, and both desired that strength for different reasons. Lucas wanted to be strong to support everyone he cared for, and Klaus wanted to be strong for the sake of revenge. Beyond that, there's definitely one character that's even more similar to Klaus, that being Flint, the twins' father. To begin, I'd like to mention how one point of analysis many bring up about Mother 3 is Lucas's fear of family abandonment, as evidenced by the Tane Tane mushroom trip and also evidenced by an Itoi quote. In particular, that Flint's breakdown over Hinawa's death and seeing his father lash out on people around him manifests as fearful anxiety that his own father will one day inflict the same violence upon him. Klaus's grief from this scene is very different. It can be said that Klaus seeing his father blindly attack others became internalized, and while it is debatable how much free will, if any, Klaus has as the masked man, it's absolutely apparent that Flint blindly attacking people is very similar to the masked man doing the same thing, the difference being the emotion of the two characters. Flint is indignant and suffering through the worst pain and loss of his life, but the masked man is completely emotionless. Regardless, both are capable of hitting anything in their way until they're brute forced into submission. With that in mind, it's very striking to know that it can be said that with certain scenes in Mother 3, Klaus is a parallel to Flint. The main takeaway I'd like to bring up is the visual metaphor that was implemented. In Chapter 7, the way the masked man swings his sword is eerily similar to how Flint swings the log in Chapter 1. I do believe this was meant to be very clearly showing Klaus channeling and mimicking the rage that he had previously seen his father show. Similar to the difference between the twins, this too seems to be something planned back during the N64 days, with his promotional image showing Klaus holding a stick upwards in a way that's all too familiar. One more piece of literary similitude between Klaus and Flint I'd like to bring up is that for a majority of both characters' screen time in the game, their faces are hidden, Flint's by his hat and Klaus's by his helmet. During these segments, they're portrayed as nothing less than strong, stoic, and close to indomitable. And yet, when both of their respective visages are removed, their humanity is finally shown. Both are at their most vulnerable states with their faces shown, and both lose any desire to fight. Flint takes the ultimate sacrifice for Lucas's sake, and Klaus stops everything altogether. I believe this all to be very likely intentional, especially in contrast to Porky's grand and callous unveiling. I'm not the only one to believe this, however. Fellow Mother Series video creator Monkey Nest believes so too, and I think this video would benefit from some of his literary analysis, so pardon the break from my voice and please welcome him.
In addition to the similarities between Klaus and Flint, conversely, the purposeful differences between them also continue to enhance Mother 3's themes and story. Klaus's brash display of emotions, like immediately going after the Drago, in comparison to Flint's closed-off exterior, and how the ending of the game inverts this, with Flint opening up in juxtaposition to Klaus being completely closed off. As mentioned before, they both wield weapons, and going further, their selected weapons say quite a bit about them as characters. Flint, a utilitarian and practical man, a sheep farmer, wields a stick primarily, with his only additional weapons also being variations on types of wood, demonstrate a blue-collarness about him and an inclination to the old Tasmilly, the naturalistic side, while Klaus's sword is metal, contrasting Flint's naturalistic weapon, and even is reflected in the game's logo. This thematic through line is reflected in general by their clothing, with Flint's being that of a rancher, one who's close with the earth, and Klaus's being more militaristic, as well as with his design's robotic motif. And it's no coincidence that they gave the younger of the two the metallic weapon. Since the mid-1990s, Japanese storytelling has commonly predicated feelings of uneasiness and fear and horror relating to children, a symbolic gesture of the fears of the older generations being replaced and effectively killed off by their offspring, as they're on a purely nature level there to replace them. This doesn't necessarily suggest Flint, the representation of old Tasmilly, as some sort of dinosaur that's ways are outdated, but just to show and prop up the discomfort the people of the village have with the technology being forced upon them, which is culminated in the reveal of New Pork City, the most drastic departure from the small countryside village possible. This is also likely a contributor to why Lucas's design meets the two somewhere in the middle, lacking the robotic concept of Klaus's outfit, while still sporting something more modern than Flint's cowboy aesthetic. A couple of the big questions imposed by Mother 3 are, where do we draw the line with traditionalism as well as liberalism? And when do we let our feelings take us too far or not far enough? And Flint and Klaus act as the two sides of these arguments, with each quite far in the opposite direction, and Lucas being the answer that there's a healthy medium.
I hope that gave you all some interesting insight. One thing in particular I'd like to bring up that Monkey Ness's analysis made me think of is that an interesting parallel between Lucas, Flint, and Klaus is that both Lucas and Flint choose to wield sticks for weapons. Meanwhile, Klaus in Chapter 1 uses homemade knives to fight against the Mechadrago. For all intents and purposes, a stick is as natural of a weapon as you're gonna get, and while sticks are of course demonstrated to be more than adequate for fighting, typically most wouldn't consider them a deadly weapon. I think it represents that Flint, and especially Lucas, both set out not to kill, but to neutralize threats. Klaus, on the other hand, is determined to kill the Mechadrago as an act of revenge, using a man-made weapon which by comparison can end lives. With this in mind, it certainly can be said that Klaus is a lot hastier than Lucas, and even Flint, who does decide to spare the life of the Mechadrago when given the choice. So while Klaus is a lot like Flint, he's absolutely no carbon copy. Klaus sure was hasty, but I'll get into that more later. I now want to delve into the mental state of Klaus, and try and answer a burning question that many Mother 3 fans seem to have. Just what is up with these unused battle backgrounds featuring Klaus? In my humble, I totally haven't analysed every minute detail about Mother 3 opinion, I think that these unused battle backgrounds that were all but confirmed to be for the final masked man battle were meant to represent not only the mental state of Klaus, but the internal struggle between his organic side and his robotic side. Let's delve into each individual one. Firstly are these ones showing both the twins. Honestly, not much to say about these, it's just Lucas and Klaus. Although I do want to point out how the bottom of Klaus and Lucas's shirts look a bit different, indicating that Klaus's shirt is untucked and Lucas's is tucked in. A very, very subtle indication showing the differences between Klaus and Lucas's characters. Then there's these two additional ones of Klaus. If you know anything about Mother 2, Ness is naked in Magic Hand, as in Japan, it is common to portray one's innocence with nudity, so it's likely the same thing with Klaus here. The silver skin and hair, with red eyes on the second one is eerie, and heavily contrasts with the innocence of the other Klaus here. It's also a sign of what to expect with more of the backgrounds to come. Next is these immensely interesting metallic looking designs that aren't seen anywhere else in any other place in Mother 3. My humble guess is that these are Klaus's equivalents to Ninten and Ness's flying men. The gold one could represent his courage from his organic side, while the silver one represents his mechanical corruption. It's also possible that the gold one could represent Lucas instead. Finally, there's several horrifying variations of Klaus with a horrified expression. I think these represent the mental state of Klaus. A boy who suffered the ultimate price due to a rash decision. While many still debate this, I do not think that Klaus was alive at the end of Chapter 1 of Mother 3. He fell down a pretty high up cliff, was likely thrashed relentlessly by the Mechadrago, and ended up face down. I can't see how he'd be breathing still after that. Anyways, I think these backgrounds show the mental anguish of not just a deceased child, but one that was denied his right to death. one that was taken from what should have been a retrieval by his father and grandpa mere meters away, kidnapped by the Pigmask army and turned into the first and only human mechanical chimera. One thing of note that you may know about the masked man is that he has no heartbeat. Putting enemies to sleep in Mother 3 typically reveals a beating heart sound to indicate their heart beating inside of them. Seemingly deliberately, the masked man is lacking this. Connecting this up with dialogue from Tane Tane Island of a hallucination of Klaus asking Lucas to feel his heartbeat, it paints a quite unsettling image. Did Klaus have his internal organs replaced with machinery? It's not a nice thing to think about when it comes to this boy who had died and was brought back to life against his will. Considering Klaus's right arm is visually shown to be made of metal and therefore no longer organic, it is absolutely no stretch to say that organs of his that were no longer functioning, like his heart, were taken out and replaced. One more thing of interest while I'm still talking about unused content are the flashback cutscenes between Klaus and his family members that were to show up as interludes during the final battle. The static filters to me indicate that as the reanimated slave corpse that he was, his past memories were quite literally corrupted, or even degraded, like how a VHS tape suffers generational loss. Very interesting to think about, in my opinion. Regardless, on the topic of the final battle, I think it is imperative I discuss its outcome. Now, for the sake of this video not getting taken down or age restricted, or the like, forgive me for my potentially informal way of wording the events that concur. Klaus ends himself, deliberately. While this is something that seems to have sparked confusion for some players, thinking that he may have done so by accident, I believe it was wholeheartedly the author's intent that it was a conscious decision on Klaus's part. Klaus regains free will after years of being a zombie-like robot commander, and this is the very first thing he wants. And can you blame him? He's no longer an organic being. He was forced into the role of an armed child soldier, mechanized and weaponized to do the bidding of Porky Minch. He's a monster. If you've been a part of the Mother fandom for the past couple of years, you may see that some people like the idea of Klaus having actually survived the final battle, going on to live a semi-normal life, but it just wouldn't make sense. How could you go back to living a normal life when you've got mechanical parts inside of you replacing your organs, and you've got years of trauma having been a slave to an army led by the most destructive human being ever to exist? This wasn't an accident. He wanted this. When Klaus went to go fight the Mecha Drago all those years prior, he was meant to die, and he was just fulfilling that destiny finally. He could finally be with his mother again. It did seem like it was his destiny, didn't it? Most people tend to interpret his actions at the end of Chapter 1 as an accident. Rather, he didn't understand the ramifications of seeking out the Mecha Drago, not realizing the grave danger it put him in. And why wouldn't it have been an accident? When you're a 7 or 10-year-old, usually the idea of going out to do an action with knowledge that it'll likely be your last isn't something that crosses your mind. But there is some circumstantial evidence in the game that gives credence to an alternative interpretation of Klaus's actions. I dub it the unlucky number theory, and I'll go over what it entails now. The basis for this interpretation is that Klaus actually goes to go fight the Mecha Drago, expecting that he's gonna die, knowing he won't survive, and just wanting to kill the Drago in return for Hinawa's death. There's 3 main points for this theory, and they are: 1. In the mole cricket battle, Lucas's health starts at 38 while Klaus's starts at 42. This is significant as the number 42 is symbolically seen in Japan as an unlucky number, specifically sounding similar to the word shine, which relates to death and dying. 2. Klaus isn't wearing his shoes. While it can be inferred that Klaus lost them in the fight, it's possible that he was expecting not to survive. This is significant because, again, in Japan, it is customary for people to take off their shoes before entering their homes to prevent tracking dirt and dust into their houses. With this line of thinking in mind, it is customary for people to also remove their shoes before they believe they are going to die, as to not track dirt and dust into the afterlife. Seeing as it is established that the Tasmili villagers believe in an afterlife, and Klaus had an underlying desire to see his mother again, it really paints an interesting picture. And finally, number 3. A line from one of the Magypsies points out that Klaus had little regard for his own life. Pretty chilling. When you put all of this together, it really opens up a new way to look at Klaus. Was what he did something of a sacrifice? Did he know his time was up and that he had to go out in a way that would avenge his own mother? With this interpretation in mind, it really makes Klaus's fate as the masked man all the more tragic. He was denied his right to death. He was denied the right to be with his own mother again. This certainly explains why his first decision upon regaining consciousness was to throw that lethal thunder attack out. He knew it was his chance to finally go where he wanted to go all those years prior. Who knows if that unlucky number thing was intentional on the developer's part. But if it was, damn, they sure were smart. Regardless, Klaus was just hasty. You'll forgive him for being hasty, won't you? What a masterpiece this game is. As much as I rag on Mother 3 a lot for cutting out stuff that I personally think would have made the game a lot better, and for not being an awesome platformer RPG hybrid game, the game is still nothing short of art. If you've watched all the way to the end of this video, I can only assume that you've played and beaten Mother 3, and to that I say, congratulations. You've experienced quite possibly Nintendo's greatest piece of art. Not everyone is going to get this game, not everyone is going to understand the hype, the tears and the pure emotions. This game may very well in the West continue to be viewed as the no localization game and nothing more. But if you're one of these people who have played through the game and understand the artistic merit behind it, the years and years of development that made this game into the sensation that it is, then you're awesome. Keep enjoying Mother 3, and the rest of the Mother series too. I know I will for as long as I'm around. Thank you so much for watching. Before I go, I need to give two major shoutouts. First to GG Fan, a veteran Mother 3 content creator on YouTube, who inspired me to make this video with some messages about Flint and Klaus's parallels, and second to Monkey Ness, who provided some further insight on those parallels. Be sure to check out both of their channels for more videos about Mother. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, following me on Twitter, and joining the EB64 Discord. I hope to see you all again soon.